The open negotiating window was a busy one, including the Bucs trading Carlton Davis. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is to become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, just general thoughts, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Head to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. The Buccaneers signed some of their own and make an expected move in releasing a player. More on that coming up in a little bit. But let's start with the top story and something that I have been talking about for a few weeks now, and that is that the Buccaneers are moving on from cornerback Carlton Davis and moving him to the last team that he faced. So Carlton Davis was traded to the Detroit Lions along with a 2024 sixth-round pick and a 2025 sixth-round pick in exchange for a third-round pick this year, pick 92 to be more specific. And this move will free up some cap space for Jason Licht and the Bucs to continue to make more moves. Davis has played in just 35 games over the last 3 seasons and has not played a full season yet in his career. The Bucs signed him to a 3-year, $44.5 million deal back in 2022. But as I've mentioned a few times, when I targeted Carlton Davis as a potential cap casualty, the cost was no longer meeting the production because of the amount of time that Davis was missing year after year and the Bucs cap situation. They just could not justify keeping him around anymore, especially with just the 1 year left on his deal. So Davis was due a base salary of $14 million this season and can now go somewhere that he can play more man coverage, which is where he's always excelled compared to that of the primary zone coverage that the Buccaneers tend to play. Now, I mentioned I didn't think the Bucs would get more than a day 3 pick for Davis if he was traded, and I was certainly wrong there. Granted, I was not factoring in 2 extra picks that the Buccaneers threw in, but a third-round pick is a huge get for Jason Licht in this deal. In addition to clearing some cap space, around $6 million this year, $8 million next year, they get a pick in a round where Jason Licht has done some serious damage over the years. Some of the third-round picks that Jason Licht has made in his tenure: Yaya Diaby, Rachaad White, Robert Hainsey, Jamel Dean, Mike Edwards, Alex Kappa, and this receiver named Chris Godwin. I'm not sure if you've heard of him or not, but that's a pretty solid list of contributors that Licht has gotten in the second half of day 2 of the draft. Of course, there were some misses too. You had Charles Sims in Jason Light's first year as GM. You had Kendall Beckwith, Keyshawn Vaughn. But this has been a round of success for Licht over his tenure. And now the Buccaneers have picks 89 and 92 in the third round, where they can select 2 players that can come in and contribute, hopefully, or potentially package those together and move up. Or you could even pair one with another pick, maybe pick 26, to move up in the first round and secure an edge rusher. But What do the Bucs do at corner now that Carlton Davis is gone? The obvious answer is that Zion McCollum showed enough last season to earn a starting job this year opposite of Jamel Dean. McCollum started 9 games and played in all 17 last season, filling in for both Dean and Davis through stretches of the year, and he looked like he had taken a giant leap compared to his rookie campaign. He didn't get any interceptions, and he did drop a few potential ones. David, his running bold prediction was that every week was going to be the week that Zion McCollum finally got an interception. But McCollum did finish with 68 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 9 passes defensed, and allowed just 59.8% of passes thrown towards him to be completed. That's down from 72.7% his rookie season. So he shaved off about 13% of passes thrown his way to be completed. Of course, the other option is that the Bucs address Davis replacement in free agency or the draft. Sean Murphy-Bunting was a player that I mentioned on Monday's episode. He is going to the Arizona Cardinals on a 3-year, $25.5 million deal, so he is off the table, but plenty of corners got signed, but there are still plenty more out there that can be signed, though I think this would be a situation where if the Bucs don't feel like the replacement is already in-house, they're going to address it in the draft, potentially as early as the first round with a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry or Enos Rakestraw, 2 guys that we've seen mocked to the Bucs early on in mock draft season. I still think they're better off going edge rusher in the first round, but corner is now certainly in the cards for that 26th pick, depending on how the board falls for them. Davis finished his Bucs career with 9 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, 324 tackles, and 73 passes defensed in 76 regular season games. You want to add in the postseason? All right, well, then Carlton Davis will add in 44 more tackles, 6 more passes defensed, and a Super Bowl title where he shut down Tyreek Hill on the biggest stage there is. The Lions are getting a player that, when healthy, could certainly help their defense get to the next level, teaming up with Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, Cameron Sutton, Afitu Melifonwu. It's a great move for both sides. And of course, I wish Davis the best of luck outside of when the Bucs travel to Detroit. But this was a move that I felt was coming for quite some time, whether it was via trade or via a release. And sure enough, the Bucs have opted to free up some of that cap space and move on from Carlton Davis. However, the Bucs continue to take care of their own and make an expected cut. That is coming up next here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, futures. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Right now, UConn is the favorite to win it all at plus 480, with Houston at plus 650, Purdue at plus 700, and Tennessee with the 4th highest odds at plus 1,000. The Gators are plus 6,500. Florida Atlantic is plus 13,000, and USF is a whopping plus 30,000. So a $5 bet on USF to win it all could win you a cool $1,500 if you believe the Bulls are going to shock the world. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Everydayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow. Evan Klosky of 10 Tampa Bay will join me to talk about everything that's been going on during this negotiation window, and I'm sure he'll have some reaction to the Baker Mayfield contract. In the meantime, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Quick disclaimer that I didn't say at the top of the show. Obviously, this episode is pre-recorded. It is a little after 8 o'clock on Monday night. So some of the things that I talk about and some of the free agents that are still available as I am doing this show may not be available by the time you're listening or viewing. So again, I can't control that. I can only talk about what is going on up to this point. So don't freak out in the comments if I mention someone or something and then something has already happened. That's why I bring you the show 5 days a week, because then we can continuously talk about all of the changes that has happened between the time that I do this show and the time that I do the next show. Makes it a lot of fun, keeps you guys entertained. But again, this is pre-recorded, so don't freak out if more moves are made in between the time you see or listen to this and the time that I am recording it. But about an hour before the negotiation window opened, the Bucs agreed to a 3-year deal with kicker Chase McLaughlin, worth $12.3 million, a $4.1 million average annual value, placing him 12th among kickers in that category. He comes in just shy of Greg Zuerlein's $4.2 million per year annual value in a deal that he just got from the Jets. McLaughlin set a team record by making 93.5% of his kicks last season and making 7 of 8 from 50-plus yards. And I went through a long list of kickers that the Bucs had over the years and how reliable and impressive McLaughlin has been for the Buccaneers. Now he gets his money, and the Bucs have a kicker that the team and the fans can have confidence in every time he sets foot on the field. This was another major free agent that the Bucs needed to make sure that they brought back, because they have not had good luck with kickers. And when you have one as good as McLaughlin, you want to make sure that you keep him around. In addition to McLaughlin, the Bucs brought back defensive tackle Greg Gaines on another 1-year deal worth $3.5 million. Gaines was one of the players that I marked as returning to the Bucs, thanks to how he did as a rotational player. He already knows the system. He already knows his role. He can come in and be an effective player yet again for the Buccaneers. Gaines played in all 17 games last season, started 2 of them, played 42% of defensive snaps on the year, and he finished with 24 tackles, 1 fumble recovery, 5 quarterback hits, and a sack for the Bucs last season. He's a reliable rotational guy, and reliable rotational guys and depth guys in the trenches cannot go overlooked. The Bucs kept a good one in bringing back Gaines. Now, Gaines accounted for $1.9 million in dead money against the cap this year. This deal is not going to change that. It was too late to be able to do anything about that $1.9 million, but the Bucs still have some money to play with, just not a ton of it at this exact moment in time. Now, the Bucs are also not bringing back one of their own. They have released wide receiver Russell Gage, freeing up about $6.5 million in cap space, according to Over the Cap. But Gage also accounts for $6.9 million in dead cap this season. Look, Russell Gage was just decimated by injury during his tenure, and I'm always going to be wondering what could have been, because as many of you know, a lot of our longtime everydayers, I was a big fan of this signing when it happened before the 2022 season. Unfortunately, we just never got to see that potential realized after Gage played in just 13 games in 2022 and then missed the entire 2023 season. Even in 2022, he was playing through injuries. He was never 100% when he was on the field, and he still managed to make some highlight reel catches, take some really brutal hits, and bounce back up and be able to continue to contribute. He finished with 51 receptions for 426 yards and 5 touchdowns. Now he gets to be a free agent once again, probably going to look for a 1-year prove-it deal in an offense where he can showcase his skills and hopefully be able to get a big deal yet again. So, as it stands now on Monday evening, the Bucs have a little over $10 million in cap space, according to Over the Cap. And yes, that includes Baker Mayfield's deal, where he counts just $10.75 million against the cap this season because Jason Light and Mike Greenberg are wizards, and there's no other way to describe it. That's just how they are. There is still the potential to rework things with Chris Godwin and Vita Vea. Both of them account for over $20 million in cap hits. In fact, Chris Godwin is north of $27 million in terms of his cap hit for this season. Plus, you could work an extension with Tristan Wirfs and potentially lower his cap hit this year. You have Antoine Winfield Jr.'s franchise tag. You work out a long-term deal with him. You can lower his cap hit for 2024. So that 10 million can certainly get higher and allow for even more moves with just a couple of corresponding moves. There are some that just aren't going to get done. And I know Evan has spoken on this show quite a few times about how the Bucs may look to move on from Chris Godwin after the season, because you can't really justify paying two wide receivers over $20 million a year. I disagree. I think there's room for both on this team and on this roster and under that salary cap. But the Buccaneers have started making those moves to free up more cap space, because there are still players that they need to sign, whether it's their own players, whether it's outside free agents. This team is far from the one that we are going to see take the field in the 2024 season. There are plenty of moves that can be made, but two of the biggest ones that I have mentioned and I have harped on have come to fruition, and that is Carlton Davis being moved to the Detroit Lions and Russell Gage being released. Russell Gage, I think pretty much everyone saw that one coming a mile away. There was a lot of disagreement as to whether or not Carlton Davis will be or should be moved. It was strictly a business decision, and that's how these things go sometimes. So the Buccaneers now, with a little over $10 million in cap space that they can still play with. There's still plenty of free agents out there, but after a really busy day, what's next for the Bucs? And there's one more of their own that they really need to take care of. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It can be easy to ignore our social battery and spread ourselves thin, especially with social gatherings picking up after the winter. I know for me, between my day job, the podcast, and traveling every weekend due to my son's schedule, I find myself drained faster and faster every day, but still having to push through in all situations, telling myself it's for the greater good, regardless of how I feel in the moment, often ignoring my own needs in service of others. Speaking to someone on the outside without a personal bias in my day-to-day life can be extremely beneficial and help me reshuffle what I view as a priority versus what should actually be a priority. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Wrapping things up here on a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And on yesterday's show, I rattled off 10 players, 5 offensive and 5 defensive, that I would have liked to see the Bucs pursue in free agency. After one day, 3 of those names have already landed with new teams. I mentioned Sean Murphy-Bunting earlier in this show. He's going to Arizona. Gus Edwards is now going to the Los Angeles Chargers, going from one Harbaugh brother to the other. And Bryce Huff is headed to the Eagles. So 2 of my defensive players, 1 of my offensive players now gone. But the one that I said was most likely out of that top 10 to come to the Bucs is still out there, and that's Jordan Whitehead. And it appears that the safety market is going to be a favorable one for GMs as teams continue to unload safeties as cap casualties, and the market price for safeties continues to go down. Now, as much as I would love to see the Bucs make an agreement or two on Tuesday, and again, maybe you're watching or listening and they've already done so, so don't attack me in the comments. This is, as I'm recording this right now, my phone is going off that the Buccaneers are bringing back Chase Edmonds on a 1-year deal. So, as I'm recording this, I did not have Chase Edmonds in my show notes for this episode. Chase Edmonds coming back to the Buccaneers on a 1-year deal. That's all the information that I have right now. It doesn't say what the contract value is or anything like that, but Chase Edmonds returning to the Buccaneers. They still need at least one more running back. I'm going to keep harping on that. And now it looks like they are going to address that in the draft. But the one move that I think needs to be made before anything else, sans Chase Edmonds now, is bring back Lavonte David. It was into the negotiating window last year when Lavonte David signed his 1-year deal, and obviously it will be again this year. But the Bucs have done a great job of taking care of their guys. Lavonte needs to be in that mix with Baker and Mike and Antoine and Chase McLaughlin and now Chase Edmonds. The Bucs want him to be a Buck. He wants to retire a Buck, but this needs to get done soon. A couple of linebacker deals have gotten done, but day one seemed all about the running backs, with 8 running backs finding new homes. Josh Jacobs to the Packers, Saquon to the Eagles, Tony Pollard to the Titans, which I don't really understand that move, but I digress. DeAndre Swift to the Bears, Devin Singletary to the Giants, Antonio Gibson to the Patriots, Gus Edwards to the Chargers, and Austin Eckler to the Commanders. So, before we see the market for linebackers start to heat up, the Bucs need to knock this out and get it done. I was honestly surprised that we didn't hear anything about Devin White on Monday, but again, it was all about running backs, edge rushers, the quarterbacks with Kirk Cousins going to Atlanta, Russell Wilson going to Pittsburgh. Trenches were being addressed on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. All in all, we've seen, as of this recording, over 70 players come to agreements within the first 7 hours of the negotiating window, which brings me to another point. Do not panic about moves being made. If the Bucs haven't signed any outside free agents, or you see all these guys getting scooped up, you saw the Eagles make a lot of moves, the Commanders make a lot of moves, the Giants made a lot of moves. Do not freak out if you don't hear the Bucs name pop up with a lot of this news being discussed. We are over 70 players that have agreements in the first 7 hours. There are still over 620 free agents available. This isn't one day where after the one day, everything is over with and you have what you have. Not everything has to be done today. Not everything's going to be done even before the draft, which we are over a month away from. So don't freak out. The Bucs are going to sign players. But the next one that they need to sign needs to be Lavonte David. He needs to be taken care of because we heard him talk on WDAE about how he wants to retire a Buccaneer. But then he turns around on the NFL Network and says that he's not going to rule anything out. He doesn't have to retire a Buccaneer, and I'm sure there are plenty of teams that can contend for a Super Bowl this year that would be very interested in the services of a player as reliable as Lavonte David, even missing games with some injuries. He has been one of the most consistent, reliable, and productive linebackers in the NFL over the last decade. He's criminally overlooked all the time, and none of you nor I understand why, but the Bucs need to get this done. And I realize that Jason Light said similar things about Lavonte that he did about Baker Mayfield. They want him to be a Buck. He wants to be a Buck. That's usually a good starting point. It is usually a good starting point, but you can't take it for granted. It needs to get done. Because if you lose Lavonte David, you've already said goodbye to Devin White. Everybody's made their peace with that. You potentially have in-house replacements to be a starter to replace Devin White. You do not have that for Lavonte David. I don't think that this defense can succeed if you go into 2024 with your starting linebackers being KJ Britt and Servassier Dennis. You need Lavonte David there to be the anchor, to be the captain, to be the leader. Then you have KJ Britt, Servassier Dennis, and potentially a draft pick all competing for the other starting job. But he's got to be there in order for it to work, because you cannot go in to this next season in a defense the way that Todd Bowles likes to run it with two brand new, really, really green linebackers. KJ Britt showed some flashes, but he's still not all the way there. And we know that. He's solid, but he is not Lavonte David. He is, he's not really even Devin White, at least not from the aspect of being able to get after the quarterback, which is something that we know that Todd Bowles likes to do. So, Jason, I know you're an everydayer. Get Lavonte David done. Send everybody some good news on Tuesday morning. With that, I am going to bid you all a fair adieu. Plenty more coming up on tomorrow's episode. I'm going to be joined by Evan Klosky. More reaction to whatever the Buccaneers news is on Tuesday. And of course, I'm sure he's going to have plenty to say about Baker Mayfield's contract. We'll get a little bit into the structure of that. But again, Jason Light, Mike Greenberg do a great job having that deal only account for $10.75 million against the salary cap this season, allowing them to continue to do some work and make some moves. In the meantime, though, please check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.